Confirm now to members that we are in public session and the meeting is open to the public. I'm not sure if there's anybody due to come in from outside to sit in the gallery. So at this point the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. So everybody who's with us now are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi password. Details are available in the gallery rules. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So it's proposed that we'll have an oral evidence session with Richard Pengelly, the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Justice, and this will be recorded by Hansard. Our members agreed with that?
Yep.
That's lovely, thank you. Before we move into that and ask the Permanent Secretary to come in, if we move to agenda item 5, which is committee membership. So I'd be grateful if you would note the committee membership as at page 48 of your meeting pack.
Noted.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, declaration of members' interests. So again, page 49 to 51 of your meeting pack. You'll all be aware that Assembly members are required to register relevant financial and other interests in the Register of Members' Interests. Details of registered interests are published on the Assembly website. In addition to this requirement, Standing Order 69.5 states that a member who has A, a financial interest in any matter, or B, a relevant interest in any matter, must declare that interest before taking part in any proceedings of the Assembly relating to that matter. In particular, there is a requirement to declare any interest that might reasonably be thought by others to influence members' approach to the matter under consideration. So proceedings of the Assembly does include meetings of this committee. As this is the first meeting of the committee, members should ensure that any financial or other interests that relate to the remit of the committee or that are likely to be relevant to a substantial part of its work are drawn to the attention of the committee. It should be noted that failure to register and or declare an interest may be an offence under section 43 of the Northern Ireland Act. Do members have any interest they wish to declare? Deirdre?
I have an immediate family member that works in the court service, so obviously that will fall under the remit of this committee.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Well, I'm in a similar position. I have an immediate family member who works in the legal profession. I also should advise the committee that previously I was a trustee on the RUC GC Foundation. That is no longer the case, but my register is not yet updated. Okay, the rules governing the registration and declaration of interest are contained in the Code of Conduct and the Guide to Rules relating to the conduct of members, and further advice and guidance is available from the Clerk of Standards. The Clerk of Standards will provide an informal briefing on requirements in relation to declaring interest in committees before next week's meeting. Sinead, we've just gone through the declaration of interests. It just, because you missed at the stage, if anybody had anything else to declare, we've been through that process. Have you anything you need us to record? You're good? That's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 7, committee procedures. So this is page 52 to 90 of your meeting pack. Members, you're asked to note the following guidance papers which are based on established Assembly procedure and practice. So that is Guide to the Powers and Operation of Statutory Committees for Chairpersons and Members, Guide to the Role of Committee Chairpersons, Guide for Members to the Role and Functions of the Committee Secretariat. I would also draw your attention to the guidance on privilege and matters sub judice, which is summarised in pages 63 to 65 of the meeting pack. Under section 50 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, for the purposes of the law of defamation, absolute privilege applies equally to the making of a statement in proceedings of the Assembly and the publication of a statement under the Assembly's authority. This privilege also extends to meetings of the committee. You should note, however, that absolute privilege does not extend to press conferences or to statements made to the press. If you're aware of potential problems associated with discussing a matter that is sub judice, which is a matter that's being or is about to be considered by a court, the rule is contained in Standing Order 73 and provides that any matters in respect of which legal proceedings are active should not be referred to in committee proceedings except to the extent permitted by the committee chairperson. In such cases, the matter awaiting adjudication should not be prejudiced by comment in a public session of the committee meeting. Okay. All right. Can you please note that guidance, and if you require any further information or clarification, will you speak to the clerk? Has everybody agreed?
Noted.
Yes. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. Another housekeeping matter, I would draw your attention to the guidance on the language and simultaneous interpretation arrangements that have been put in place by the Assembly Commission, which allow for simultaneous and passive interpretation of Irish and Ulster Scots spoken in Assembly proceedings. On non-plenary days, the service can be provided at no more than one committee meeting at any time, and it is not available to support committee business on days when the plenary is sitting. Members should therefore be aware that it may not be possible to provide the service in response to all requests. Any member wishing to have their comments in Irish or Ulster Scots interpreted during committee proceedings should inform the clerk at least 5 working days in advance of the meeting for which the service is being requested and specify the relevant agenda item or items. Witnesses wishing to have their comments in Irish or Ulster Scots interpreted during the committee proceedings will be expected to inform the clerk at the time of confirming their attendance at the meeting. Standing Order 78 provides that they may speak in the language of their choice. This is members at the stage that you may speak in a language of your choice. However, where simultaneous interpretation is not provided as outlined in the guidance, a member who speaks in a language other than English must provide a full and accurate translation of their remarks. So again, standard. Everybody clear? Everybody content? Noted. Lovely, thank you. Agenda item 8, guidance on timescales for interaction between committees and departments. And I would refer you to pages 92 to 98 of your meeting pack for the relevant paper. So this is a guidance paper which sets out the timescales for the provision of information and evidence between departments and committees and was agreed previously by the Executive and the Assembly Chairperson's Liaison Group. Members content to note the guidance?
Yes.
Thank you. Agenda item 9, subordinate legislation, delegation of technical scrutiny to the examiner of statutory rules, and I refer you to pages 99 to 104 of the meeting pack for the relevant paper. Can I ask you to note the guidance paper on handling subordinate legislation? Yes. It's normal practice for the committee to delegate responsibility for the technical scrutiny of statutory rules to the examiner of statutory rules, who is an officer of the Assembly, and to authorise her to report her findings to the committee, the Assembly and the department. By delegating authority for the technical examination of the rule to the examiner, the committee can focus on the merits or policy aspects of the rule. So, members, I would seek your agreement that the Committee for Justice resolves, under Standing Order 43, to delegate to the examiner of statutory rules the technical scrutiny of statutory rules referred to the committee under the above mentioned standing order. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
All right. The committee further resolves in carrying out this function, the examiner shall be authorised to report her technical findings on each statutory rule to the Assembly and to the relevant department, as well as to the committee itself, and to publish her report. Okay? Yep. Great, lovely, thank you. Agenda item 10. The 2017 to 22 Committee for Justice Legacy Report. A copy of that report from the previous mandate, which sets out the past committee's key activities, outputs and achievements, and the clerk's memo are at pages 106 to 154 of your meeting pack. You're asked to note the legacy report unless you have any further information that you need. Are members content to note the report? Do members have any other information that they wish to gather at this juncture?
Probably I know will come up. It's probably just around some of the legislation that was passed in the last mandate, and obviously going forward to look at the implementation of that, and also that I know in one of them there may be a legal challenge to it as well, in terms of anonymity. So just when we can get an update on those issues, that would be useful.
Yes, it would
when
be
we consider that as part of our work programme as well.
Do you think we can
Sure, we could fill that into the forward work programme if members are content.
Yeah. That'll be helpful, I think. Thank you very much. Thanks, Deirdre. Thanks, Caroline. All right. Agenda item 11, key issues in the justice sector, research and information service, that's RAISE. So an Assembly Research and Information Service paper which provides an overview of the key issues in the justice sector is at pages 156 to 153 of the meeting pack. I'm just going to get my pack up to speed from that. 156. Lovely. So can I ask you to note this paper unless any further information is required?
Noted.
That paper will probably be quite useful whenever the Permanent Secretary comes in. We can use that to ask some questions. Lovely. All right. Agenda item 12. So an overview briefing on the Department of Justice. So the Permanent Secretary will now attend to provide an overview of the Department of Justice. The first day brief provided by the Department, which sets out its structure and budget and provides background information on the various directors and agencies and key work streams, and that can be found at pages 199 to 257 of the meeting pack. A list of the decisions made under the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act 2022 is also included for information. The Clerk's memo is at pages 195 to 198 of the meeting pack. So if everybody can just get themselves set up. Lovely. And with that, I welcome the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Richard Pengelly, to the committee. Richard, you're very welcome. I should notify you that this session is being recorded by Hansard and is also being broadcast around the building. So, but we're very grateful to have you with us today. We look forward to hearing what you have to say, and we look forward to working with you in due course. The Hansard transcript will be published on the committee's webpage. So Richard, over to you if you want to provide us with your briefing and an overview of the department. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I know it's I can remember the days I used to come to the committee and not need to have to bring glasses with me, so I know I'm getting old and being here too often. Can I firstly just say it is a genuine pleasure for the committee to be back and to be here. And I know, Chair, you've had a very constructive conversation with the Minister, and I just, on behalf of officials across the department, want to emphasise our desire to work constructively and in an open and engaged way with the committee throughout the duration of the mandate. I think there is a very, very important scrutiny role. That's not something the department should ever hide from or be frightened of. I think it's really a partnership agreement, and together the justice sector will be stronger for a collaborative endeavour. So, I mean, it goes without saying that if there are any issues at any stage, if any member wants to come to me, I'm more than happy to engage in whatever way we can to help things. I just today wanted to give some sort of overview and context about the department, particularly maybe for those members who haven't been that close to the Justice Department before, although I absolutely recognise, and sometimes I have to concede it, civil servants just don't understand the nuances of being an elected representative, is that quite often on a day-to-day basis you're dealing with more granular details about our portfolio than we are. So there, as I say, that's why there's a two-way sharing of information. Chair, you're over the coming weeks you're going to hear directly from each of the directors in the department, who will go in some considerable detail. So in terms of my overview comments, I'm going to sort of skim across the surface. Obviously there'll be time at the end for a bit of dialogue and conversation, and so too you'll be speaking to the Minister. I mean, at this stage in the second week of restoration, the Minister and I haven't had the long conversation about setting out strategic priorities and legislative priorities. That work is ongoing with the Minister, and I think she'll want to talk to you directly about that. We've provided you with a copy of the first day brief, and again, I'm happy to go through that. That sets out an organisation chart with some summary information and a breakdown in terms of how the department's structured. In overview terms, I'd say that there's 5 key areas in the department: access to justice, safer communities, reducing offending, justice delivery, and the courts and tribunal service. Then we have 5 executive agencies. In total, we have about 3,200 staff across the core department and agencies. That includes about 1,300 prison service operational staff. In terms of the big numbers, 62% of staff work between the prison service and the courts and tribunal service. That's where the big numbers of that 3,200 are. We're also responsible for 8 non-departmental public bodies, a range of functions there, but the size and scale of that is obviously dominated by the police service, which is by far the largest. I thought it would be helpful in particular if I give a few high-level points in terms of the budget. I'm conscious that there was an executive meeting this morning that has helpfully tweaked that a little bit. In terms of the current financial year, 23-24, we started with an opening budget of just over £1 billion. It was 1157 million, and a capital budget of 129 million. PSNI, as I said, dominates that. They account for 65% of our budget. But if you take what I would call the critical service delivery components of the justice sector, if you take prisons, police, the court service and legal aid. In total, that consumes about 90% of our budget. So the consequence of that is when we get into savings, and if we want to prioritise the police, there's very little left outside police and prisons as critical areas that we can prioritise away from. Also, we're very much a people organisation. Staffing accounts for 69% of our total spend. The difficulties of achieving financial balance this year, I think, have been well documented. When I woke up this morning, the latest overspend figure was about £35 million. I think the executive meeting today has helped change that for the better. But it's still, this far out, it's been a difficult year. Lots of savings have had to be made. We started the year with a forecast overspend in the region of £149 million. That was brought down to £35 million through slowing spend across the sector. So we suspended and paused police officer recruitment. We didn't increase prison officer numbers despite a growing prisoner population. Prisoner population at the moment is sitting in and around 1,900. Funded complement of staff is for about 1,450. I took up this job just April 2022. My predecessor tells me he used to start to get sleepless nights when the prison population hit 1,600. We're at 1,900. In the course of this year, we will breach 2,000. And that's a very, very difficult challenge. The main issue for us in prisons is that with a fixed cohort of operational staff and a growing prisoner population, it really squeezes the rehabilitation work, which is of fundamental importance in the prison sector. We absolutely are committed to treating all those in our care with dignity and respect and providing education and training and rehabilitation opportunities. That financial squeeze makes that all the more difficult. In terms of capital, the opening budget was 129 million, and that's really contributing towards important projects like maintenance of an ageing prison estate in particular, and some very important digital projects within particularly the courts and tribunal service. £37 million of that opening budget was returned in the course of the year due to some slippage of programmes. The biggest component of that was £30 million for the police college. That doesn't mean those projects won't go ahead, they've just slipped down the line a little bit. One very important point, and I'm sure some, if not all of you, will have heard us say this before. Since the devolution of justice to the Assembly, the Northern Ireland bloc has increased by around 43%. In the same period, the Department of Justice budget has increased by 3%. In the same period, the health budget has increased by just over 70%, and the education budget has grown by around 45%. We, of course, would say we're victims of our own success. We've demonstrated efficiency and a capacity to deliver, but we think we've now crossed the line in terms of where we can go. Just by way of illustration, if over that period since devolution of justice, if the justice budget had only kept pace with inflation, we would have just over £400 million a year more than we currently do. And you'll appreciate that will be absolutely transformative in terms of some of the issues we're trying to address. Looking into 24-25, the executive clearly will be starting to wrestle with the budget position for that year. Given the difficulty of the position, as a planning assumption, if we assume a flat cash budget, which may indeed turn out to be more positive than what the reality is, that would crystallise our estimation pressures of just over £400 million, £429 million, or 37% of our baseline. And that's just to stand still. That figure wouldn't make any inroads into trying to re-establish policing numbers. So policing numbers at the moment are on target for just over 6,300 by March 2024. So that number wouldn't allow that to grow back. There's a piece of work needed, and Chair, you'll be more familiar with this than me probably. There's a piece of work needed to establish what is the absolute optimum number for uniformed colleagues in the police. That analysis is ongoing within PSNI, but I can say without any shadow of a doubt it's higher than 6,300, considerably higher. Of that 429 million, about 200 million of that is a range of factors: increasing prison population, legal aid, which is a demand-led service, continues to grow, additional demand in courts and police services, and paying pension issues. There's about another 227 which are exceptional issues outside the control of the department. Things like the PSNI data breach, the cost for that, and then legal settlements in terms of holiday pay and the McLeod injury to feelings. So one-off costs, but they still need to be met. And as I've emphasised, the majority of the costs we face are demand-led and inescapable. At just some crude indication, we have no control over the number of cases that proceed through the courts, the volume of legal aid required for people to litigate cases, the volume of compensation claims, or indeed the numbers committed to prisons. Like policing, and it's not for me to speak for the Chief Constable, but he's very much on the record saying the financial squeeze means that policing becomes more of a reactive service. The real sweet spot for policing, like any service, is in preventative work. It's far better to prevent crime than to detect it. That's true of every service we provide, not just in the justice sector, but I think indeed across all public services. One of our aspirations is to work collaboratively across sectors. I've talked about the prison population. We've recently established a prison population oversight group, and we've brought colleagues in from the health sector. We intend in due course to bring colleagues in from the housing executive, but that's actually looking about trying to establish some innovative ways to work on a cross-sector basis, both to reduce people going into prison and to ease their pathway out of prison at the end, and to make sure when they come out, they stay out. I think that's a really exciting piece of work, Chair, and I think we'll probably want to spend some considerable time on it moving forward in terms of the detail of it. Where I want to take our spending, and I talked about the reactive element of policing, I really want to invest money in the probation service and the Youth Justice Agency, because I think they're critically important in terms of trying to catch people before they pass the point of no return and to reshape and improve lives. And finding money for that is always difficult when you're in a financial crisis and you can only deal with the reactive element. So that was a short, if somewhat gloomy, overview of the budget position. Just in terms of other points, just to say, as I said, the Minister will be coming to talk about the forward look. In terms of the backward look, I think, Chair, we've provided the committee with a list of all decisions that were taken through the period of suspension. Just to emphasise to all members, every single one of those decisions was taken in the context of a public interest test about was it necessary to take a decision in the absence of ministers. I believe it was the case. As the committee works through that, more than happy to come back and talk through the details of any of those issues if it would be helpful. That's really all I wanted to say, Chair, in terms of an overview. I hope that's of some help to the committee, and happy to have whatever conversation you would like now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Richard. We appreciate that. Some of the figures that you've highlighted there are absolutely stark. I mean, 429 million, did you say, could make such a significant difference to the entire system, which is under massive pressure. So I'll open the floor now to members. Does anybody have any questions that they have? Alex and Doug, yes. Alex, go ahead. Deirdre, yeah.
Yeah, one of my big concerns is the lack of PSNI recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
How many officers are you exactly short, and what would be the cost to get it up to the figure that it should be? And what discussions have you had to try and get that?
Well, the discussion, I mean, this is something of a challenging area for us, because there is strict operational independence for the Chief Constable, and his prime line of accountability is to the Policing Board. Recruitment issues are a matter for him. That said,
money comes from you.
The money comes from us, and certainly I want to, because it's important that I don't stray into the Chief Constable's territory, but it's also important that we work with the committee to give you as much information as we can. I mentioned in my opening remarks, to understand what the deficit is, you need to understand what the optimum number is. There's a piece of work ongoing within PSNI to determine what the optimum number is. NDNA agreement talked about an aspiration of 7,500. I think there was previous analysis that talked about something in the region of 7,200, 7,300. there's a piece of work needed, I think, to get a bit more granular detail, but my instincts are it's in that sort of space. At the moment, we're on trajectory for March 24 to be at, I think, about 6,350. So way, way below. In terms of moving forward, the financial position, there is no money for police recruitment. So there are some really, but the Chief Constable, and again, not speaking for him, but just reflecting on comments he's made publicly, he is at the point where he is starting to think his prime responsibility must be to deliver a safe policing service and to keep the community safe. There clearly is a number below which he will feel uncomfortable in being able to do that. I'm not sure if he's exactly at it. I think he's probably, the sense is he's getting very, very close to it. So there needs to be recruitment, it needs to be considered in the context. The other issue too is there's a limiting factor, because from memory, I think in previous recruitments there is a merit list of about 1,000 individuals that PSNI could draw from in terms of putting through training. But I think it's something of the order of about 300 to 350 people a year could be trained with the current capacity of the policing college. Natural attrition is of the order of 200 to 300. So there's even if money was available, there's not a rapid escalation in police numbers. But they're critical challenges that we need to look at. But it needs to be taken forward in that very, very difficult financial environment.
Just a major worry. It's getting worse and worse and worse, the numbers. So.
I think certainly there are issues around public expectations to what the police can do with the lowest numbers that it's ever had in the history of the service. And it significantly increases risk. There's no question of that. Doug?
Richard, thank you for your brief. And finances always start. You never come with good news when we're talking about finances, but you did talk about the Department for Justice budget had about £35 million worth of £35 worth of pressures now. That's all police, I would imagine, according to the brief.
I hope they don't exist after today.
Yes, well, I was going to say I get the fact that things might be better after today, but the Chief Constable has still said he is going to give a 7% pay rise to his officers regardless. Has that been factored into that, or is that factored in for next financial year? And when I look at next financial year, if I can, I'm looking at the pressures of £307 million, 24-25. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. Is that factoring in the 7% rise?
The short answer is, in terms of trying to, I'll try not to make this overly complex. There's two components to pay. There's contractual pay and non-contractual pay. The contractual pay is really the one-step pay progression that every year. That element is factored into the 35 million. The non-contractual bit, which is what we call the revalorisation, the percentage uplift on the back of a pay review body, again, that was an issue. Trying to secure additional funding for that was part of the executive discussion today. So it wasn't in the 35 million, but the executive is very attuned to the need to provide pay awards across a range of public sector workers. But I think the nub of your question is, even if that works out exactly as we want it to today, that will give us the funding to implement this year's pay award. It does not provide a baseline increase, because a pay award this year will need to be paid next year and the year after. That deepens the financial challenges for next year in terms of actually trying to sustain that pay award, because the pay award will be made in perpetuity to the individuals. It won't be a one-off payment. But that deepens the financial challenges for us.
And I guess, Richard, I mean, part of this is about asking that question about support to a Chief Constable who's gone out to his officers and says, you're getting a 7% pay rise, and he's standing over that. And I'm just wondering, is the department going to stand over him in regards to that?
Well, the department will have due regard, and the Minister is very clear, she will have due regard to the obligations and responsibilities on her. One of her absolute obligations and responsibilities is to live within the allocations that the Executive and Assembly agree for her. So the Chief Constable is absolutely clear and unapologetic about his desire to properly reward his officers. And I think nobody would criticise him for that.
Indeed not.
But there needs to be proper process. The funds need to be secured. and the payment of any pay award needs to be subject to approval by both the Finance Minister, and it needs to sit within executive pay policy. That has to be the case before the pay award can actually be implemented and paid.
No, absolutely, if I can, Chair, if you don't mind. And you're right, and I suppose that's linked into this whole recruitment piece as well, which is starting without the funds in place, because we're hemorrhaging more out than we're getting in. And the other question, if I can ask you, Richard, I mean, one of the big issues, and you mentioned it, is when we talk about prison population, 1,900, and we're going to hit 2,000, and that's getting beyond capacity in many ways, if it has not reached capacity. And I know they're opening up some buildings which they'd closed down and weren't intended to open up again. But I think remand's sitting at about 36%. Is there plans to alleviate that pressure by having a process of releasing people who are down as remand to try and bring that number down again?
Well, just to be clear, during COVID, for example, there was an early release scheme.
Yeah.
We have no plans at this stage to activate an early release scheme, but it remains an issue that we'll keep under consideration. There are definitive plans. We've established a working group to look particularly at the issue of remand. And the prison population oversight piece of work that I talked about earlier, that's going to look on a collaborative basis. So that will involve working with colleagues across the probation board and other sectors. But can we make better use of technology in terms, are we fully utilising electronic monitoring and tagging of individuals as an alternative to remand? What other safeguards can be put in place? And the other issue too is 28% of our sentenced population is for short sentences of 12 months or less. Now, 12 months, apart from the fact that there is an alternative to prison for those individuals, in terms of what happens next in their lives, given the accessibility of about 50% remission and time served on remand, there's very, very limited opportunity to do any rehabilitative work with those individuals. That rehabilitative work can be better done in the community with an alternative to short-term sentences. So I think they're all parts of that continuum that we look at.
Fair point. And I guess, and you probably won't answer this, but you don't have a ceiling, do you? Of this is the tipping point. We can't go above 2,000. We can't go above 2,100. Is there a tipping point?
Well, we haven't sought to quantify it, but when you're heading towards 2,000, I mean, as you said, when we opened Davis House in McGabbery, the intention was to demolish some of the old square houses. Mercifully, they weren't demolished. They've been recommissioned. We've only one left. So we will reach the point where we physically start to run out of capacity. Routinely in McGabbery, we have 400 to 500 individuals doubling up. Throughout COVID, we had nobody doubling up, and that was one of the key factors in the success the prison service delivered through COVID, that no prisoners in Northern Ireland were hospitalised throughout COVID. But now at 500 doubling up, that's a really uncomfortable position. It raises the temperature and leads to more incidents within the prison estate.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Doug. I've got Deirdre now.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, for that, Richard. And I suppose it will be good to get an early indication in terms of how the budget situation changes in the current year and get into the next after the announcement today on public sector pay and the impact that would have. Obviously there's a huge issue in terms of not just the immediate budget, but also get into next year's budget setting process and the impact that's going to have, as you say, and even with the fiscal council's report that's been published today in terms of looking at a potential cliff edge that may happen in the next couple of years. But when you look at the breakdown, obviously in terms of spend, you have said over 90% goes into police and prisons, courts and legal aid. A key aspect obviously of the department's work is around, particularly access to justice, but also reducing reoffending. So it is to get a sense around how the budgets are being managed at the moment and what areas of spending have been cut or reduced and the impacts on that. Because it is to try and get, obviously when you look at the amount of staff, that is going to be a particular pressure that you can't avoid. But it's the impact then of those pressures and how they're felt elsewhere, and particularly around that prevention piece that you talk about. So it's trying to get an indication of what the department has been doing, and importantly where there have been budget reductions in what areas, and is this going to be a consistent thing or pressure that we're going to feel in the next period. Also an update on, I suppose, those, I mean, there's the staff within the system and within the arm's length body, police and prisons, but also an indication in terms of, as you say, in reducing reoffending, you would prefer to do that in the community. There's organisations that are funded within the community from the department. So are there budgetary impacts for them? And particularly workers that are working within those sectors, primarily the community and voluntary sector, where a large part of this prevention work would take place. So just to get an indication of pressures that are being felt there in terms of the budget.
I mean, I'll speak at a general level. The starting position for 23-24 was a 1.7% reduction. That was broadly applied across all areas. We've talked about, as of this morning, we had a £35 million forecast overspend. That was primarily in policing, and that was primarily because police started with a much bigger overspend forecast. They took measures, they paused recruitment, they didn't, they rode back on some other issues. The 35 million was the bit that they couldn't get. The reason it was an overspend was the view in policing was they couldn't identify any further areas to reduce spend, and they had to spend the money from a safety perspective. Most other areas managed are on target to come in on budget. Because of, I talked about 69% of the budget is staffing. Mostly that's been addressed by not filling vacancies. We're carrying a very high vacancy load at the moment, in the region of 300 or so, I think, from across the department and bodies. That means the pace of work slows down. Even speaking to the minister, I mean, the minister obviously is getting back into the department and reading her way in, but she's commented to me that things just feel a little more fraught than they were back in October 22 when she left, just because of the vacancies. As a department, we're not taking forward policy development work. That maybe doesn't manifest itself immediately as an issue, but it will undermine our long-term policy work. I think you make a really important point about some of our partners, particularly in the voluntary community sector. I have always felt a bit uncomfortable when there's a tendency when the civil service gets into financial crisis, one of the first places we go is to reduce funding to the voluntary community sector. And the reality is, for every £1 you put in the voluntary community sector, you could get approaching £10 worth of value in public service. So that's an issue that has been squeezed, but it's something we need to look really, really closely at. And I know it's an issue the Minister is deeply concerned about because of the, I mean, I was out a couple of weeks ago with one of our victims group. The work they're doing with victims is absolutely of critical importance to the sector. We need to try and find a way through that. Everyone's being squeezed. Voluntary community sector organisations, I think, are putting people on a regular basis on protective notice. They have no certainty beyond, at best, a few months away. So those are the sort of critical issues that we need to get a grip on. There needs to be, I think, we're well past the point where we can say we have a financial pressure. Let's salami slice that pressure and ask every business area to absorb the same. We're in the territory where we're going to need to identify some areas that we just need to cease work. I can't point to any areas that I would label as low priority that we could stop without a high service impact. And that's really, really worrying for us.
I know we're probably going to get into that over the next couple of weeks as we get into the detail of each of the directorate areas. And that would be a concern that the community and voluntary are often seen as the low-hanging fruit that are cut first. And that does have a huge impact in terms of out on the ground. Some of the other issues, I mean, I know you'd highlighted Naomi will be coming with her areas of priority, but I think if we can get an indication as a committee as to what the priorities are going to be, when we're likely to know that, and also the legislative programme, particularly around primary legislation that may be coming forward, I think that would be useful to kind of get an indication as early as possible on that. I think the other stuff that you touched on, Richard, around cross-departmental work, particularly in health and housing, is critical. And again, I suppose as we get into our work, I would be keen to hear more information. I know in a previous role in the last mandate, issues as simple as securing addresses, from leaving prison, and a disjoint that there'd been between housing and the Justice Department, the impact that had then on the individual in terms of reducing the risk of reoffending was huge. So again, areas like that, I'm keen to get an update from the department on making sure that you are outward looking and engaging those other departments, and obviously we'll want those other departments to be doing the same as well. But on the basis of that, in terms of, I know it's been in the report around bail and remand, and just concerning, you know, that there are figures, I think it was from January, a 36% of in-prison population who have been unsentenced. So just in terms of the speed of justice and moving through the process, again, as a concern, obviously how the budgetary pressures will impact on these statistics also is a concern. And I know from some of the correspondence that we have that we're going to look at later that came from the Justice Department around the Youth Justice Agency, and I'm glad you mentioned that as an area of priority, just to get feedback on I suppose the implications around vacancies. I think it would be useful if we could get an update on where the vacancies are and the impacts that that's going to have in terms of your work and prioritisation of your work going forward. Because again, that report that was done by Queen's University around particular categories or groupings of those that find themselves within the youth justice system, I'm concerned, you know, at the levels of people from certain community backgrounds and what we can do to reduce some of those figures. So again, we'll be looking forward to that and an update from your youth justice kind of directorate and what you're going to be doing. I think that would be useful as well. Thank you.
I mean, I'll not get through. We'll take a lot of that away. No. I mean, it's really helpful because we can take that away. Just one of the points when you were talking about, particularly people coming out of prison, the work we're doing with the oversight group. You know, one of the potentially very, very low, if minimal cost options is let's get to a position where we don't release people from prison on a Friday or the day before a public holiday, because we know that can often put them into crisis situation. And that's a no cost option. So that's the space we're looking at. In terms of prioritisation, the Minister will obviously give some thought to her own legislative priorities. I would say at a very, very high level, and subject to the Minister will want to make this more granular, fundamentally it's about keeping people safe, and a lot of our demand-led services are about that. But the big issue that bleeds across a lot of our work is the speeding up justice. That has to be a strategic priority. There's lots of work ongoing. We're working with the Criminal Justice Board. We've got 5 work streams through a digital agenda, things like committal reform, early engagement. My early observation coming into the justice sector was it is a sector, but the sector is made up of a number of organisations who fiercely guard their own operational independence. Mm-hmm. And the big problems and the opportunities for improvement don't lie within any of the organisations as much as they lie at the boundary between the organisations. So taking that holistic view through the Criminal Justice Board, but that's a priority for us. But that's a really helpful overview. We'll take that away and make sure that those answers come back to you. Okay. Thank you.
You doing, Justin?
Thank you, Chair. What's the Department's approach to monitoring the implementation, impact and unintended consequences of the Justice Acts passed in the last mandate? And how has the passage of the Legacy Bill through Westminster impacted the ability of 2 of your department's directors to fully fulfil their roles, namely access to justice and justice delivery?
Well, taking the last point, the Legacy Bill is obviously a piece of Westminster legislation, and the granular detail of that hasn't worked out yet from our perspective. And I noticed there's some of the comments across the water yesterday about the pace of the legacy work. We're trying to engage and get the information we can. There is a May deadline, but we're working as normal in terms of taking forward cases. But everything is captured in the context of the overall financial squeeze. So we talked about, we have an absolute obligation to live within budget. One of the very, very few measures available to us is not filling vacancies, because there's no mechanism to downsize the department. That has an impact on access to Justice Directorate and justice delivery, reducing offending. Every area feels that squeeze. So people are under pressure, people are working as fast as they can, but there is a squeeze there, and it's not having a particular impact in one place and not in others. Just the pace of everything has come down a little bit in that. In terms of monitoring the overall implications of that, There's the particular obligations under Section 75 and looking at those obligations. We're working closely with the Equality Commission. I think they've made some commentary recently on that. We're hoping to re-engage with them as part of, it's looking more for the 24-25 crystallisation of the budget process and a methodology with them to monitor that. We've applied screening processes throughout as we cascaded the 23-24 position through all those areas, identified those areas and where appropriate put in place mitigating actions. But I think it's an area that I think the rubber hits the road in terms of your question, in terms of a specific area in a specific place, as opposed to because the general issue is everything's getting a bit tight, everything's slowing down, everything's getting difficult. But I think my colleagues can talk in terms of some very specific issues they're dealing with at directorate level.
Okay, and can you speak to any of the unintended consequences of the legislation passed in the last mandate, if any?
Well, I mean, I'm not seeing any direct unintended consequences. I think the points that were made yesterday, is there an unintended consequence that where there is a cliff edge and a deadline that work doesn't proceed? That's a comment that was made. The Minister very much noticed that comment. She's very concerned about it because as far as she's concerned, it is not acceptable for there to be any diminution in the pace of work. She's asked for further information and wants to dive into that. I'm not seeing any evidence of that, but if someone else has evidence, we're asking them to provide it, and we will certainly look into it and seek to address that.
Thank you very much.
Sinead? Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Richard. Just you mentioned in your opening gambit there about the issues in terms of prison staff.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously that will have a knock-on effect in terms of the prisoners themselves, and my concern would be around that rehabilitation piece, and the programmes that we're able to offer inside prisons. So, I mean, we're going to be debating a motion in the Assembly next week around mental health in terms of the prison population, and obviously not having effective numbers of prison staff would greatly impact on that, and then obviously that has a knock-on effect on the mental health of the prison population. If they're being confined to their cells more, there's no time for that extracurricular piece of work. So is there maybe could you give us a wee update on that? What is the current situation in terms of that provision inside the prisons, and is there a plan just to address because I know there was a recent recruitment drive around prison officers, but again, not sure how successful that was, or what is the plan going forward just to address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, there was some recruitment, but that recruitment was more about backfilling colleagues who had left the prison service as opposed to growing the number. We're still in and around the region where our operational numbers are those that were in place when we had a prison population of about just over 1,400, 1,450, as opposed to the current population. So, where and when we can do additional recruitment to grow those numbers, we will do so. Again, that takes you on a straight trajectory back to the financial position. There has been some fantastic work that's happened within various prisons in terms of collaborations with the education sector. Certainly, there's some amazing work, in particular at Hydebank and collaboration with Belfast Met. That sort of work, getting prisoners out of their cells, doing some real developmental work. We're trying to do that as much as we can, but it is constrained by a growing population and a declining operational cohort. The other issue too is, and it takes us back to the cross-sectoral nature of this, in many ways I'm conscious at times I used to say this when I was in health, but we are the service of last resort. Where the health service cannot cope with a mental health crisis, undoubtedly, I can't give you detailed names obviously, but there's undoubtedly individuals who are in a prison establishment at the moment who should be in a mental health facility, but those facilities aren't available, and we're making do with that. That can't be right. It's certainly not sustainable, and it's not in the best interest of those individuals. So at this stage, unfortunately, the best I can say to you is we're aware that is a problem, we're deeply uncomfortable, and we're actively trying to way to fix it. I don't have the golden key that's going to unlock that problem at the moment, and but it's something that should concern us all at societal level, because the longer that exists, it ripples back throughout society, and it will do so very, very quickly, and it will mean more problems for policing, more problems for the education sector, for the wider health sector, and housing issues. So that's the point the Minister is very, very attuned to, and the point that she wants to engage with the Executive is, I mean, I'll not rehearse all the numbers about the very significant growth in health and education budgets, the very, very limited growth in justice. To grow the justice budget at a healthy rate, given the differential scale of, for instance, health and justice, it wouldn't require a big bite out of health, but we could do an awful lot of things that would really help the health service and the education sector. And I think that's the debate the Minister wants to have with the Executive.
And I think I don't think there's been a recognition. Everybody's very protective of their own budgets and what they need, and that's understandable, but it's seeing the benefits of that cross-departmental working, and the mutual benefits for society, but for both departments, if you want to look at it in that crude way. But no, that's fine. I'm sure we look at it in our forward work programme. Thank you.
Ciara?
Thank you, and welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
I'm just following on from Doug and Sinead, and it's just a quick one. Given the current pressures with regards to particularly staffing and resources, and also the movement of new technology within particularly the prison service, has there been any issues raised in relation to, and I'm not aware or familiar that would you use agency staff within the prison service, in the use of new technology such as body scanners, and that staff would have not only you have the resources, but they know when to use it, when it's most appropriate to use it, under what kind of procedures, legislation do they use, and likewise how to actually understand when they do use the machine, as to if they find something or don't find something, which can have, if not done properly, quite a negative impact on an individual who is then put into isolation. And I'd just like to raise at this stage, that has been come to my attention this past 24 hours in both prisons, and that's through solicitors and that's through families who have contacted me. So I'm just saying, given the pressures that we've talked about, is that something that has been raised? Is a negative impact due to the pressures, staffing, resources, staff training, and is there others that maybe is having a negative impact on the prisons and the population within the prison?
I'll briefly deal with the sort of general point before I get to the specific. The general point in digital, when I talked about our aspirations in speeding up justice, we have some work streams. One of those work streams is the digital agenda. I think there is a mine that hasn't been fully tapped across the justice sector about how we can better embrace new and emerging digital technology. And I have a bit of a concern that at times the digital agenda seems to be, how do we automate our processes? Whereas the point you're making is the digital agenda needs to be, how do we embrace new technology to completely and fundamentally redesign our processes to make them both more efficient and more effective? So there's a big general stream that will cut across the whole justice sector in terms of that. The very specific example about body scanners, I haven't heard any concerns. All the points that have been made to me about body scanners are positive. In terms of training, as I understand it, training in terms of the utilisation and the reading of the scan, that's been done in collaboration with colleagues from the health sector, who obviously will have much more experience of that. The only problem that's come to my light in terms of the body scanners has been where there is a limit. I think from memory, I think it's 50 scans a year an individual can be exposed to. If an individual was on remand and going for a protracted trial, they could be in and out and subjected to the body scanner. So it's possible to reach that limit. So the only negative comment has been where someone's approaching the limit and they may have to go back to the body search as distinct from the scan. But I haven't picked up, but I certainly we can pick that up separately with you if there are issues
just on
but
the use of.
But I think it's an illustration of a new technology that is both more effective, and I think from the perspective of those people in our care, it's less invasive than the body search. But there's a myriad of examples, but you know, as a sector, we need just to try and find out what's the art of the possible in the digital space.
It would be useful then to get more detail on that. Thank you.
Are you, Ciara?
Yep.
Richard, I've got a few things, if I may. Shocker. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for your candour, and I'd like to thank you for your expression of willingness to work constructively with the committee. I think that's important to all of us. All of us here are eager that the justice system works as well and is as smooth as it can be to the benefit of people in Northern Ireland and society as a whole. So it's good to have that assurance from you at the start. I'm excited to hear about the housing executive and so on being brought on to try and deal with some of these issues for prisoners leaving prison. I think it's a massive issue about, and even to hear the practicalities of people not being released on a Friday because they've nowhere to go. They're sent up to Londonderry with a prescription in Belfast and they have to come back and forth every day. There's no question that sends people into a downward spiral. And at times I think there's some work to be done with hostels about whether or not those are the best place to have people without any wraparound care, and whether or not that situation also exacerbates people's descent back into old habits. So it's really welcome to hear that progress is ongoing and that the housing executive is going to be involved in some of those conversations. And I think we would all look forward to hearing more information about that when the time comes. With regard to the rehab situation around remand, I'm wondering what conversations there have been in the sector and with the legal profession, because obviously it's, in some respects, it is not in a prisoner's interest to engage in rehabilitation whilst on remand because it can be perceived as an admission of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So are there conversations around that to try to remove that element in order that everybody can avail and it is not detrimental to their prospects in court?
I could chase that up for you. I'm not sure about the granularity of whether those conversations are happening. Certainly the point you make is the point that's been made to me, that whilst individuals are on remand, they cannot be compelled to undertake any form of rehabilitation work. The sense I get is that it's nearly left at that you know, you don't need to come out of the cell if you don't want to. I think your point is let's find a way to coax them out.
Let's find a workaround.
Has no adverse implications for the progress of their trial. I think that's a very strong point. Certainly I'll take that one back, Chair.
Thank you. The other issue is about, I understand from some of the papers that we have in front of us today, there is mention of the Minister bringing forward potential legislation on children's bail. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if there's anything being done about adult bail and the issues around that, the effectiveness, the enforcement, other things that might be looked at there. Is there going to be consideration to adult bail?
Well, in terms of a legislative programme, we haven't had the conversation yet with the Minister about the particular priority of her programme, so that's one we'll need to come to. The bail conversation is part of conversations that are happening within the department in terms of management of the prison population and the remand group, but whether that crystallises into any potential legislative changes in the future will be one we'll need to pick up with the Minister.
Thank you. You'll forgive me for this, but I was in a committee this morning too, so I have not seen what may have arisen at the executive today, except for a brief paragraph in a statement from the Minister of Finance that's just been released, indicating that the allocation for pay awards is just over 100 million higher than the 584 million provided specifically for pay in the financial package. Could you give us some indication, if you're aware at this stage, as to how that might impact on your department?
The 100 million increase, do you mean, or the totality of it?
Well, what shortfall might that still leave you? What's going to be the impact on the DOJ? Where are you now, essentially?
If we deal just with the 23-24 year, I have everything crossed that there won't be a shortfall, that the package that we get will be fully funded, but I think the point that Doug made, that does nothing for 24-25 in the future years, and that's a real issue of concern for us. Just a couple more and then I'm done with. Just with regard to the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, I sit on that kind of political advisory board, and I was astonished to find that whenever the programme sought to find the number of strategies in Northern Ireland that impact on tackling paramilitarism, there were over 60. But more than that,
there was not one central place where all of those strategies could be found. It also highlighted the extent of duplication in Northern Ireland, and I think it's an important point for the Executive Office going forward to address duplication in work, duplication in funding. But the thing that shocked me was we've moved to an outcomes-based kind of agreement model, and it was shocking to me that there was no central place, that silo working continues, and I presume that that is a matter that's going to be raised at the Executive, and I would ask that the Minister would do that and highlight for, on one example of just tackling paramilitarism, that it impacts almost every department, and yet every department appears to be working on strategies alone and not corporately with agreed outcomes for the benefit of society.
Can't disagree with anything you said. From our perspective, we, Adele and colleagues in the executive programme identified this work like you when I saw it. I was somewhat taken aback. So we thought the best approach would be to immediately take that as a product to the Executive Office, because I didn't want it to be pigeonholed as an issue about the Tackling Paramilitarism programme. It's a broader issue of concern for the Executive, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't repeat it, but the strap line they put on it was that a quote was attributed to an unnamed official that, in Northern Ireland we used to launch ships, we now launch strategies, and that's a concern that, I've always had a bit of a hobby horse around strategies. For me, a strategy is incomplete unless it's costed and contains an action plan, because it has to be a strategy for a purpose. I think some of our strategies in the past have been very well-intentioned statements of aspiration, but it needs to contain a pathway to get you to that ultimate outcome. And it's only when you do that sort of mapping exercise that you really get a sense about the golden opportunities for collaboration and cross-sectoral working. It's important that we don't spend all our time talking about the financial crisis. We've got to start talking about opportunities, and I think there's a big opportunity there that, yes, it will require money, but I suspect in many places 3 or 4 different organisations are spending money on a particular cohort or sector, and if that money was brought together, it could have a much more powerful impact. But I think TEO is the right place to lead that piece of work.
I absolutely agree with you, but I just was keen that in terms of this sector, that the Minister's going to highlight it in that room, because it's shocking to me that everybody is not, that the government departments are not pulling in the one direction. Two more. On the point that you raised there, essentially about finance following function, I think to take up Justin's point about previous legislation passed, it has struck me on my tour around various aspects of the justice system that finance has not followed function. So, for example, when we look at the stalking laws, the upskirting, down-blousing issues, and particularly things like Operation Encompass, all really worthy and valuable legislation. Operation Encompass is an absolutely marvellous thing. The issue about where there's domestic abuse in a home, and the school will be notified and be able to provide provide the child with what it needs. But all of that was done without the cost implications being addressed for the relevant bodies, particularly in those cases, the PSNI. And I think it's important for this committee as a scrutiny body going forward that where that happens, that's going to be an important element of scrutinising the legislation, that what is going to be the cost to implementing the legislation. I suppose I just want to put that on the record.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to my previous comment, because if legislation is really how we put policy into practice, the policy comes from strategy. And it's at the very early stage, it's not enough to have a strategy and a statement of aspiration. It needs to be a costed action plan. And that action plan, and I've seen, not in the justice sector, but in other sectors I've been in, where one organisation has felt their role's policy. So they develop a strategy and a policy, and then when it's finished, it's lobbed over the fence to another organisation to implement. And inevitably what you get is the organisation comes back and says, we can't afford to implement this, or it's just unimplementable. So I think the development of the strategy and the policy and turning that into legislation, it needs to be both the policy colleagues plus the delivery colleagues, the likes of PSNI and other, and they need to develop the costed action plan. And I would go further and say we also, the final, it's maybe the icing on the cherry on the cake, it needs to be, here's a set of metrics that 2 years from now you can look at to judge whether or not this has been successfully implemented. It's not just what does success feel like, what are the demonstrable metrics that allow us to judge that. And that whole package needs to be put together, and it needs to be part of the discussion with the committee at that very embryonic stage before we turn that into legislation and actually give effect to it.
I think most of us will be 100% with you on that. I mean, certainly in those circumstances, the PSNI have had to absorb those costs, which now we're seeing being borne out. You know, it's another element of pressure on them.
I think that was maybe doable at a point in time where there weren't financial challenges, and the police have a budget of £750 million, and if you lob something else in, it can be absorbed somewhere, but they're way past that point now.
Yes, they are, and it's good. It's actually good to see that the department recognises that. Lastly, I suppose is the major point that I have, that as I have engaged with justice, the thing that's frightening to me is something to which you alluded earlier, which was the extent to which people are engaged in the justice system who should not be anywhere near the justice system. People who are in police cells overnight because they're in mental health crisis and there's nowhere safe for them to be. People who are in prison but who should be in a care facility. All of those aspects and the links between people's mental health and well-being and then them ending up in the justice system when it is the wrong place. And it's back to this business of the right place, the right people, the right care. It seems to me there is immense cost to the justice system of these people who should not be in the system. So, bearing in mind your predecessor's previous post and your previous post, you're all entirely familiar with this issue, and it seems to me that the justice system is picking up the slack where others are not able to fulfil their function. So what conversations are underway to try to examine these issues and put responsibility back where it should be, in order that people who should not be part of the justice system do not end up in it?
Those conversations have started. Certainly there's been some conversations involving the Department of Justice, PSNI and the Department of Health. And it even gets down to quite small issues that, how many times is a police officer the first responder because an ambulance isn't available, and how many, routinely on a Saturday evening, how many police officers are held in an emergency department because they're with someone who's potentially violent and they can't leave. I suspect if you go into the Ulster and the Royal, you probably see half a dozen uniformed officers. Now, that's a desperately bad use of police resources, but given the volume of, thinking back to my previous role, given the volume of frail elderly people who have to go to emergency department, that's a frightening prospect for them to come up when they're feeling particularly vulnerable and unwell, to see uniformed and armed officers around them. That can't be conducive to their recovery. So there's a whole myriad of reasons those conversations need to happen. The conversations are starting to happen. But trying to be pragmatic about it, I honestly believe that where the health service is at the moment, they have a massive job of work in trying to address the particular problem of waiting lists and emergency departments generally. If that's not going to be top of their agenda in the short term, and I could understand why they might feel it, I think the alternative has to be some additional resources in the justice sector to properly look after those individuals where we are the safety net until we get the longer term optimum solution. But it can't just be, we can't afford to fix it now, so we just let them flap in the breeze. That can't be sustainable for anyone.
No, absolutely right. And that's kind of the fear that I have, because more often than not now, the justice system becomes the place of first resort because people phone the police, and it's not the police's role. And the other side of it is, once the police are involved, they've got to deal with the ombudsman and be investigated and so on at every turn should something go awry in circumstance where the health department doesn't. So I'm not suggesting that they don't have their sorrows to seek, but my concern is for the justice system and actually for people who should not be, you know, having to face prison, having to face hostels and so on, when it's not the best place for them and it's not in the interest of their health. So, does anybody have anything else? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just on that very point, because I know in the last mandate, it would have been in October 22, the three ministers did meet to agree to start work on a housing first model around chronic homelessness and issues in terms of addiction and the prison service and how the three departments work. So it is just to get an update on how that's been progressing, if it has. And if it hasn't, then can we get an update on what engagements the Minister will have then with the Department for Communities and Health on these key issues? Because I think the issue you raised there, Richard, around saying health is going to look at treating the symptoms at the other end is a concern if you're just going to do that in isolation of all of the preventative measures that we've been kind of talking about and raising concerns. So I think an update on that programme, and if there are others, would be useful for the committee to have.
We'll chase that up for you.
Do you want back in?
Well, just I'm glad you mentioned Operation Encompass, because I think that was piloted in the South Down area initially. So an update on that would be useful as well. I think, has that been rolled out across the north now, or is it still in that pilot stage?
I'm not sure if it's completely across everywhere at this stage yet. We'll check the get a fuller update on that for you.
Okay.
If committees, the clerks just advised me there, if the committee's agreed, the clerks have made a list of the issues that we've raised, and we can write to seek an update from the department, which will save you having to write it down in memory. So, Richard, everybody,
my colleagues will be able to go through the Hansard and put it, but whatever's easiest for you, Chair. And
we'll write.
that would be really helpful if you.
Everybody content with that? Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything further for the Permanent Secretary? No? On that basis, Richard, can I thank you very much for your candour and your time, and we look forward to seeing you back with the Minister at the end of our induction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody okay? It's very warm in here. All right. I'm going to move on to agenda item 13, which is Statutory Rule 2022/212, the Police Act 1997, Criminal Records Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022, and I would refer members to page 259 to 267 in their pack. And I'm just going to try and get mine to work. That's great. Okay, so this statutory rule amends the Police Act 1997, Criminal Records Regulations, Northern Ireland 2008, to create new prescribed purposes for which an enhanced check may be undertaken by Access NI, along with a check of the barred lists, which are lists of people barred from working with children and or vulnerable adults. The amendments were made in order to allow these checks to be undertaken on hosts for the Homes for Ukraine scheme and those under the age of 16 residing in the host premises. The Examiner's Statutory Rules report on the rules will be published tomorrow, which is the 16th of February, and the statutory period for the rule has nearly expired, so as kind of we discussed earlier, it's therefore unlikely that it can be annulled if the committee were not to be content. However, further information or clarification can be sought from the department if required. Are members content with the statutory rule, or would they prefer information? Doug?
Can I just ask for a bit of information? Because what this is really saying is that there will be enhanced checks for those people, for the Homes for Ukrainians, and that's because of children possibly in the house. How does that work, though? And this is the information I'm looking. How does that work for those who are then put into a hotel setting where there may be families there with children present? Do they have to go through an enhanced check? And then the same applies then to others from North Africa, other places. You know, do they have to go through it if they're placed in a setting where there are children present? So it's just more of an information to understand that a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's a fair point. Can we follow that up? Yes. That's great. But in the interim then, are you content to just put to allow the rule to go forward? I presume I need to put the full question and read it out. You have to listen to me further, I'm sorry. That the Committee for Justice considered Statutory Rule 2022/212, the Police Act 1997, Criminal Records Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Great.
Thank you. Agenda item 14, SR 2022-213, the Rehabilitation of Offenders Exceptions Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2022. That's page 269 to 284 of the meeting pack. So, the exceptions to the Rehabilitations of Offenders Northern Ireland Order 1978 allows some convictions to become spent, are set out in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Exceptions Order Northern Ireland 1979. Certain professions and occupations which involve a high degree of trust or deal with vulnerable persons must therefore declare all past convictions, including spent convictions, when asked. So the rule amends the 1979 order to bring individuals who were seeking to provide accommodation under the Homes for Ukraine scheme within the scope of the exceptions, requiring them to self-disclose spent convictions. It also applies to those aged over 16 residing with the host or sponsor in the premises being provided. Again, as with the last one, the Examiner Statutory Rules report on the rule will be published tomorrow, the 16th of February. So again, we're in circumstances where the statutory period for the rule has nearly expired, and it's therefore unlikely that it can be annulled if the committee is not content. However, further information or clarification can be sought from the department if required. Are members content with the statutory rule?
Content.
Thank you, Stuart. On that basis, then, I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered Statutory Rule 2022-213, the Rehabilitation of Offenders Exceptions Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022, and, subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Agenda item 15, Statutory Rule 2022-217, the Police Service of Northern Ireland Amendment No. 2 Regulations 2022. Thanks, Justin. And I would refer member to pages 279 to 284 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. This rule amends the Police Service of Northern Ireland Regulations 2005 and the Police Service of Northern Ireland Reserve Injury Benefit Regulations 2008 to include the 19th September 2022 in the definition of public holidays for 2022. This reflected the announcement of a public holiday on the 19th of September 2022 for the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So the Examiner of Statutory Rules report again will be published tomorrow on this issue. The date to which the amendment applies has passed. However, the committee will still need to consider if it's content with the rule. Are members content with the rule?
Content.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-217, the Police Service of Northern Ireland Amendment No. 2 Regulations, and subject to the Examiner's Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Agenda item 16. Statutory Rule 2022-218, the Magistrates Court Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022. This is at pages 286 to 297 of the meeting pack. This statutory rule amends the Magistrates Court rules to provide for the practice and procedures to be followed when conducting a committal hearing. This follows the abolition in committal proceedings of preliminary investigations, which called for witnesses and mixed committals, which use both oral and written evidence by the Criminal Justice Committal Reform Act 2022. Again, the report from the Examiner Statutory Rules will be published tomorrow. The statutory period has nearly expired, and it's therefore unlikely it can be annulled if the committee is not content. However, further information or clarification can be sought from the department if required. Are members content?
Content.
I think on this one I would like to have some additional information. It seems to me that I appreciate the department is seeking to have committal reform. However, I think some of these issues fall around access to justice. And I think I would like to have a better understanding, and presumably if the clerks can't give me some appreciation of what this actually means, I'm happy to get it from the department. So would you get it, Kathy? Can you help me? Or?
Yeah, I can try. The Committal Reform Act abolished the taking of oral evidence basically in the Magistrates Court, and the point for that was to, first of all, to speed up justice, but secondly, to prevent witnesses from having to give and victims from having to give oral evidence in two sittings, because very often the particular offences to which it applied then would be referred on anyway to the Crown Court or the High Court. So it was to prevent that witnesses and victims from having to do that twice. I think Gillen had recommended maybe something similar anyway for our part of that in one of his reviews as well. So that was the main. So now at Magistrates Court there are a number of offences now that will get directly referred without a hearing at Magistrates Court, and there are others then that will not have the oral evidence. It was essentially taking away oral evidence
So
at that stage.
Right. So what's the practical impact on defence?
Well, I think it's maybe something that the department could probably speak to better than me, but the fact is that the case gets referred anyway, so they will still have the defence anyway at the next stage of the process. You know, they just won't be able to question witnesses at the earlier stage.
No, I understand, but I understand as part of this process, charges can be added, charges can be dropped. They can determine kind of what the case is going to be, which seems to me an important element of the process. So I think I would like to understand from the department what the impact will be on defence, Deirdre.
I'd say we can defer this one then until you get more information. Is that possible, or?
I think this one's subject to the time frame, isn't it?
So
I think I would like
just
to
get
have
the follow-up info.
Yeah, I think I would like to have some understanding about the impact on defence, because I think in all of these things, everybody must be able to put their faith in due process.
Mm-hmm.
Are members okay with that if I ask that information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, that's great. So on that basis, I should still put the question, yes? Yes?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to put the question. That the Committee for Justice considered Statutory Rule 2022-212, the Police Act 1997, Criminal Records Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. The commencement order for the relevant provisions in the Criminal Justice Committal Reform Act 2022 is provided at pages 229 to 300 for information. The commencement order is not subject to any assembly procedure. Are you content to note Statutory Rule 2022-221 C23, the Criminal Justice Committal Reform Act Northern Ireland 2022, commencement number 1 order Northern Ireland 2022? Okay, thank you for that. Agenda item 17, Statutory Rule 2022-158, the County Courts Financial Limits Order, Northern Ireland 2022. And I would refer members to pages 302 to 310 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. So this statutory rule amended the upper jurisdictional limit of the Small Claims Court from £3,000 to £5,000. The previous Justice Committee considered the proposal for the rule prior to the dissolution of the Assembly in 2022. The Committee noted that the Department had consulted the Lady Chief Justice, who indicated that additional judicial resources may be required to provide flexibility to meet any business needs that may emerge. To accommodate this, she requested that the increase should not come into operation before the autumn, and the Minister agreed to postpone the operational date until the 3rd of October 2022. The Lady Chief Justice...
On the yellow footprint, sorry, facing the red lights. You might need to remove your glasses as well.
Sorry, could I ask members to mute? The Lady Chief Justice also advised that judicial colleagues had raised concerns about equality of arms. Litigants in the Small Claims Court are unable to claim costs and may therefore represent themselves, while larger companies or insurance firms may increasingly instruct legal representatives in claims that may be of higher value. It was the Department's view, however, that the potential for this to happen would be minimal. I'm not sure. In light of the reviews of the Lady Chief Justice and the Minister's agreement that the rule would not be operational until the autumn, the Committee agreed that the incoming Justice Committee should have the opportunity to consider the proposed rule in more detail. However, the Department subsequently laid the rule on the 24th of March before the Assembly's dissolution. The Department states that there has been no change to the policy since the proposal was submitted to the previous committee. Again, the Examiner Statutory Rules report on the rule will be published tomorrow. This rule has been included in the meeting pack as the next rule on the agenda will make necessary amendments to court rules to implement the increase in jurisdiction brought about by this rule. However, the statutory period has expired and this rule therefore cannot be annulled. If the committee is not content, it can seek further information or clarification from the department. Now,
Not happy.
well,
I mean, you're pitting the small man against a big organisation. It's just not fair.
well, certainly I imagine that the increase in limit could make people consider whether or not they could take a case and again prevent them from taking such a case. I'm also concerned about the issues raised by the Lady Chief Justice. The recommendation in front of me is that we would ask the Department for its assessment of the impact of the increase in jurisdiction has had, including whether there have been any judicial resourcing implications or any indications that the concerns noted by the Lady Chief Justice regarding quality of arms have been realised. Now, on the basis of what she has said and the Department's original proposition that it didn't envisage there would be a problem, I still think I would like to hear from the Lady Chief Justice on the issue. Would it be possible to write not just to the Department but to the Lady Chief Justice for her views? Would members be content with that?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And I would ask members then to note the rule.
Noted.
Thank you. Agenda item 18. We are nearly there. Statutory Rule 2022-233, the County Court Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022, page 312 in your pack. This rule will amend the County Court Rules, Northern Ireland Order 1981 to reflect the change in jurisdiction in a small claims court from £3,000 to £5,000. Again, the Examiner of Statutory Rules report on the rule will be published tomorrow, and as ever, the statutory period for the rule is nearly expired, so it's unlikely that it could be annulled if the committee is not content. However, we can seek further information or clarification if required. Are members content with the rule?
Content.
Thank you. So if you're content, which you've indicated you are, then can we agree that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-233, the County Court Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 22, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule? Members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 19, SR 2022-243, the Damages for Bereavement Variation of Sum Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and this is at page 321 in the pack. So this rule will increase bereavement damages to be paid by defendants in circumstances where they're found to be liable in negligence for causing a person's death. So that would rise from £15,000 to £17,200 with effect from the 1st of November 2022 in line with inflation. The Examiner's Statutory Rules report on the rule will be published tomorrow. Again, the statutory period for the rule has nearly expired and it's therefore unlikely that it could be annulled if the committee is not content. But again, we're in circumstances where further information or clarification can be sought from the department should we require it. Are members content with the rule?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-243, Damages for Bereavement Variation of Sum Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 20, SR 2022-252, County Court Amendment Number 2, Rules, Northern Ireland 2022, at page 330 of your packs. This rule will amend the County Court Rules, Northern Ireland Order 1981 to provide a procedure for applications to summary judgment for all or part of a claim after a notice of intention to defend has been lodged. The order will also be amended to prescribe the procedure for applications for provisional damages for personal injuries, which are damages for existing injuries, with the right to return to court to apply for further damages if the plaintiff suffers serious deterioration in the future as a result of the original injury. Again, the Examiner of Statutory Rules report will be published tomorrow. The statutory period for the rule is nearly expired and it's therefore unlikely that it can be annulled if we weren't content. But again, we can have further information or clarification from the department should we require it. Are members content with the rule?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm going to put the question that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-252, the County Court Amendment Number 2, Rules, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, the next two statutory rules we're going to take together. So that is Agenda Item 21 and Agenda Item 22. SR 2022-254, Family Proceedings Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022, and SR 2022-255, the Magistrates Court Domestic Proceedings Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022. The next two agenda items will be taken together, as I've said, because they make similar amendments to different court rules, but the question on each rule will be put separately at the end. And this is at page 344 of your packs. So the provisions for measures to enhance support available to victims of domestic abuse when giving evidence in family proceedings were included in the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, Northern Ireland 2021. This may include the use of screens or giving evidence by live link. The rules will amend the relevant court rules to enable special measures direction to be made in the High Court, County Court or Magistrates Court hearing family proceedings for a party or witness who is or is at risk of being subjected to abusive behaviour carried out by a party, relative of a party or a witness who is personally connected to them. The Examiner Statutory Rules report on the rules will be published tomorrow, and the statutory period for the rules have nearly expired, so it's unlikely that they could be annulled if we were not content. However, further information is available from the Department if required. Are members content with the statutory rules?
Content.
Okay, then please bear with me, I'm sorry, while I put both questions. That the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-254, the Family Proceedings Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland 2022, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
And that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2022-255, the Magistrates Court Domestic Proceedings Amendment Rules, Northern Ireland, and subject to the Examiner Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. The commencement order for the relevant provisions in the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act 2021 Northern Ireland is provided at pages 356 to 359 for information. The commencement order is not subject to any assembly procedure. Are members content to note SR 2022-253C25, the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act Northern Ireland 2021, commencement number 3 order Northern Ireland 2022? Are members content? Content to note, yes?
Yeah,
Thank you.
agree.
And all of this is easy for me to say, right? Agenda item 2023, Northern Ireland Policing Board Retention and Disposal Schedule. This is at page 374 to 423 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. The Northern Ireland Policing Board Retention and Disposal Schedule is required to be laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly under Section 8.2 of the Public Records Act Northern Ireland 1923, and in accordance with the rules of the Disposal of the Documents Order 1925 by the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. The retention and disposal schedule is subject to the negative resolution procedure. The retention and disposal schedule identifies records and information which will be managed, stored, retained, destroyed or transferred, if appropriate, for permanent preservation to the Public Records Office. The schedule specifies the minimum requirements for the retention and disposal of records and information. Are members content with the PSNI retention and disposal schedule, or if any further information or clarification is required, would they indicate? Content?
Content.
Nothing required. Lovely. Okay, agenda item 24, Proceeds of Crime Act 2022, Codes of Practice, Department of Justice draft consultation paper. This is at page 424. The Department is proposing to undertake a consultation on 3 codes of practice under the Proceeds of Crime Act, POCA 2002. A range of new powers are to be made at the end of April in relation to crypto asset related items and crypto assets. Updates to the codes are required following changes to POCA arising from the commencement of provisions in the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act 2023. So, are you content to note the proposed consultation and consider the matter further when the results of the consultation and the proposed way forward are available, or do you wish to submit views or comments at this stage or require any further information? That's your choice, Deirdre.
I think to see it once the consultation comes back, and then we can have a view on it as a committee. And I would be keen just to see who and how the department are going to be engaging in the consultation as well. So just the breadth of the engagement.
So you do not wish for the committee. So the proposal is that the committee would not submit a response to the consultation, but rather wait and get the results through and then form a view. Yes?
Yeah.
But just to double check then that we would still have a say as part of the consultation process. So can there be a piece built in then that we get an update on the consultation and then we can still make a view, or what's possible? How would it normally be done?
If the committee wants to reach a formal view, it's probably better to submit it for the consultation, or you could wait and then the department could build that in subsequently. Early engagement is always it's useful, but it's up to the members.
What do you think? Would you prefer to make a submission?
It's
so
just
that
a
the
role
safe
in
side?
terms of the scrutiny, do you know, our role in scrutinising.
It doesn't preclude us from having a view, though.
Yeah.
You know, as things develop, then maybe our view will change, but...
We could have a look at it then.
So we're agreed then that we will take a look and submit a view, and then we'll look at, I suppose, what the
responses once they come
Yes.
back as well. Yeah, I think it'd be useful.
All right. You guys have that then as a decision? Are members content? Yes? Right, thank you. Agenda item 25, the forward work programme, the draft forward work programme. So the draft committee forward work programme is at page 575 to 588 of the meeting pack. Can you note this programme unless there's any further information or clarification? Does anybody have any further information or want any further information or clarification? No, so you're content to note? Lovely, that's noted, thank you. Agenda item 26, correspondence. There are 66 items of correspondence at pages 605 to 2,453 of the meeting pack.
Note them all.
This has got to be a record, hasn't it? There's also a correspondence memo, which might be best to use at page 593. So I would draw your attention to item 1 on page 593 of the correspondence, which is a written ministerial statement from the Minister of Justice announcing the publication of research on potential over-representation in the youth justice system in Northern Ireland. The research was undertaken by Queen's University in Belfast. I'm asking for your agreement to request an update from the department on the actions it has taken as a result of the research.
Yeah.
Yes.
Content?
Very good.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you. I would draw your attention to item 8 on page 594 of the correspondence memo, which is a summary of the responses that were received by the Department of Justice following a public consultation on increasing the minimum age of criminal responsibility in Northern Ireland from 10 to 14. With your agreement, we could request an update from the department on its proposed actions in response to the consultation.
Yeah.
I think that would be important. That's
Yeah.
quite a controversial one and difficult, bearing in mind some of the circumstances we've seen in GB. I would draw members' attention to item 32 on page 597. This is an action plan published by the PSNI on tackling violence against women and girls. And I would seek your agreement to request an update from the PSNI on the progress of the action plan. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And again, I would draw your attention to item 63 on pages 600 to 601. This item relates to an ongoing court case regarding historic boundary dispute and allegations of fraud. The full bundle of correspondence can be provided on request. Okay, noted. I would draw your attention to item 64 on page 601. This item relates to a series of emails from an individual that were sent to the committee office's email address. Some of the emails appeared to contain threats to named individuals who were usually public figures. Committee staff forwarded these emails to the PSNI and continue to do so in circumstances where they contain threats. I would seek your agreement that future items of correspondence from this individual will not be included in the meeting packs.
Agree.
Mm-hmm.
Are you content to note the other items of correspondence as set out in the cover sheet, or are there any of those with which you have any comments or anything of concern, Deirdre?
Yeah, it's just probably the ones there, the couple of NISRA, 26.24, 25, 26. So it's just really the stats in terms of reoffending and stuff, the prison population, so some of the issues that we touched on. So just as we get into the body of those issues in our induction, for some of those stats then where they're relevant to be potentially fed in, or just for people to have a look at them as we're going through the issues, because I think they'll be useful as well.
That's helpful, thank you. Okay, so beyond the issue that Deirdre's raised, anybody else got anything within the correspondence? No? All right. Okay, we're at the last couple of items. So, agenda item 27 is chairperson's business. So item 27.1 is a meeting with the Lady Chief Justice. The Deputy Chairperson and I have received an invitation to meet with the Lady Chief Justice, and we would, with your agreement, we would report back on anything we feel needs to be brought to the committee's attention. Are members content that we proceed with that meeting?
Yeah.
Item 27.2, Departmental Officials Meeting. Again, the Deputy Chairperson and I have received an invitation to meet with the Justice Delivery Director and Head of Finance from the Department of Justice prior to the committee meeting on the 29th of February. We would report back on anything that we felt needed to be brought to the committee's attention as usual. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 28, any other business? Do members have any other items of business? No? Thank you. Agenda item 29, date and time and place of next meeting. So the next committee meeting is proposed will take place on the 22nd of February 2024 at the earlier time of 1:40 p.m. in room 30 Parliament Buildings. Okay? The other thing you should note is that prior to next week's meeting, a photo of the members of the Justice Committee will be published on the committee's webpage, and it's going to be taken next week. Members will receive an invitation with the details of where this will take place. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, so we better get our hair cut to get the car.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. So. Yes, thank you very much.
Sound.